to another episode of Wizard Goes Boom. Today I wanted to continue my series of D&D as a war game, and I wanted to get into a little bit today about Braunsteins and the Blackmoor style of play. So one of the issues that I as a DM have run into, and several DMs I spoke to also ran into, is when it comes to faction play, especially when characters reach name level and they get their stronghold, the amount of factions and what they do can become very cumbersome as a dungeon master to manage. After all, the factions are not static. It's not just a few actors within the factions. We want to try to make these factions living and breathing, so they can present a good challenge to the players. One example of this is the AD&D 2nd edition campaign setting, Birthright. It is almost in totality a war game. There's some options for adventure, but it is mostly a war game. And one of the reasons why it became a huge burden for dungeon masters and why it didn't sell so well and ultimately was cut from the TSR lineup was because not only did dungeon masters have to keep track of what the players were doing with their domains and their factions, but they also had to do the paperwork and the accounting for the various other domains and factions that were supposedly controlled by NPCs. That is a lot of work for a dungeon master, and one that can be very frustrating. So there are two potential solutions to this problem of dungeon master workload when it comes to factions. One option would be to pass it off to the players. May sound counterintuitive, but it will take a lot of workload off of you, and it might be fun for the players. One way to achieve this would be the Braunstein, or if you prefer, you could call it Braunstein. So what is a Braunstein? A Braunstein was a game invented by David Wesley in 1969, part of a wargaming type of game set in the Napoleonic Wars around a fictional town called Braunstein. It was actually one of the very first role-playing games. In that, what happened was David Wesley acted as a referee to adjudicate what happens between the various factions in the Braunstein. So each player gets control of a faction, and then each player also has a set of goals and win conditions. And this Braunstein game could be played completely without dice or completely without rules. The only rules are your win conditions. It's kind of a freewheeling game, but the adjudication is completely up to the referee. Referee kind of like a dungeon master. Except in this case, the players, with their playing, came up with the story, not the referee, not the dungeon master. Referee is actually the correct term here. Now, Braunsteins last one session, and the game resets after that session. But you can kind of use the idea behind a Braunstein to allow players to take control of factions and run them with win conditions. And you can have them affect your game and affect the story. One such example could be, let's say a faction is the Thieves Guild in Greyhawk City, and their win condition could be take over the streets of Greyhawk away from other guilds. Braunstein is, in a sense, a game of diplomacy. if you've ever played that game. A lot of negotiation. Sometimes a fight breaks out and it needs an adjudication. For example, a street battle between the Thieves Guild and the Assassins Guild in the city of Greyhawk. Another faction could be the Wizards Guild, and they could have a win condition in which they have to retrieve a powerful artifact from another faction controlled by a lich. A Braunstein may be just the way to resolve it. Have the players run these factions and set win conditions and then let them go to town. And whenever a battle breaks out or whenever a negotiation takes place, that's your job as the referee to adjudicate. But for the most part, a Braunstein will play itself through the player's actions. Again, all of this would take one gaming session, and I would say during the downtime of the game would be an ideal time to do it. And then when the Braunstein's over, you could go back to the regular game with the results of what happened affecting the story of the regular game. Now, you may not want your players having that kind of power. It is kind of Monty Hall-ish to give them control of powerful factions, especially if it's a lich or maybe a powerful thieves guild. So you may want to find another group to run the Braunstein. But again, the Braunstein is over after one session. So kind of a step up, I guess might not be the right term to use, but kind of a step up from the Braunstein is the Blackmoor style of play, which started off as sort of like a continuous medieval Braunstein back in 1971 with Dave Arneson's Blackmoor setting, which is really what the Birthright campaign setting was. It was a Blackmoor style game because it was continuous and it didn't end in one session. The trick with a Blackmoor style of play is that you would need more players to take control of factions. A famous example of a Blackmoor faction that was actually player run was the Temple of the Frog and those cultists. A Blackmoor style campaign is more structured and has more rules to it, unlike a Braunstein. And the roles taken in a Blackmoor style campaign are more permanent. So you would essentially be playing your standard D&D game with the roles going to the regular player characters. Maybe you can run a Blackmoor style game sort of on the side while your regular game of D&D is running. And it could be with other players that take on factions and run them for you. Now, a Blackmoor style campaign is more of what you would recognize as regular D&D, but with a lot of wargaming elements. So these are the two potential choices for helping a DM with the workload of managing factions once playing levels get that high. Either a Braunstein, which is one session and involves a lot of politicking, or a Blackmoor, which is an ongoing session and much more wargamey and has the rules for it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, in the description of this video, leave a link to an example Braunstein and how to play one so you can get an idea. Let me know down in the comments if you've ever played in a Braunstein or sort of this wargamey Blackmoor style kind of campaign, or if you've ever let players take control of an NPC faction so that they can affect the story. Thank you everyone for your time and for watching, and I hope everyone has a great holiday.